the author is in control of your imagination, which is just the power of words. And an image is it's much easier to just like close your eyes, turn your head, and it will keep moving. So the pages are turning for you.
Right.
It's like skipping in an audiobook. Like it's like tap, tap, tap. There's like a time stream to it. But with the pages, they're just sitting there waiting for you.
Yeah.
You avert your gaze, and yet the page is still there.
Right.
You actually have to skip yourself, kind of poke it out through, and have to have that discipline, because if somebody's going to write something truly and profoundly obscene and they're good at what they do, it's going to affect you deeply. It's like you're there.
Met a ghost of a king on the road when I first fell. Fire burning to my knees I fell. Met a ghost of a king on the road.
We're gonna start over. Now we're recording.
The headphones are on. We are recording. I'm back in my uniform of sweats, drinking a quad
Pacific
shot.
Wave Surf Shop.
Yeah, I'm one of my sponsors.
Yeah. Give us a call.
Sponsors via my sweet sister-in-law, who's sent me a lot of stuff from Packwave. But yeah, got the quad shot in hand. I'll stay conscious. You wanted to record a podcast, but the weather was swinging outside, so feels like my left eyeball might come out. If halfway through this podcast I put my sunglasses on, you'll know the caffeine's not working.
Brutal. Is that the yeah?
Oh, it's my old man storm sensitivity now that I have, brain surgery, weather swing sensitivity.
Is it the hot to cold swing?
It's pressure swings.
Pressure swings.
So just pressure
little
swings.
Barometric.
Yeah. Any pressure swings. So and I end up sitting at my desk or doing something, and I'm just kind of collapsing in on myself with my left eye shut and my face spazzing. And then like, man, what is going on? Why am I so tired? Why is this killing me? And then for some reason, I'm dumb enough that's been years, and I'll look outside and see a storm system coming through. And every single time it's a surprise.
You're like, oh
wow. Oh, wow.
I forgot I developed that ability.
It's the weather. I developed a weather sensitivity. And of course, my light sensitivity goes way through the roof with pressure drops. So that's why my sunglasses might end up on here in a minute.
Oh, nice.
But anyway,
that's.
I'll stay here with my eyes shut.
It may not be the superpower you thought about as a child, but it's still one, I think.
Oh, and it's funny because I love weather.
You should put them on just so
I'm
we
a
get
big fan of weather. So seeing storm systems coming and just being like,
oh wow,
is new. Still new every morning.
Here's our lead in. We'll see if we can't start off with some of our familiar hits. You have criticized Jennifer Lawrence for her work in Hunger Games, or not specifically hers, but the Hunger Games for being set up. And Christy and I watched Passengers.
Yeah, that's an amazing film.
Really. So we're gonna start off with.
I like the ethical quandary of it.
Yeah.
Man.
But space chick flick. I didn't know it was a genre that would at all.
Is it a
work.
chick flick?
I think it's a rom-com. Maybe not a chick flick.
I mean, he's like kills her.
Functionally,
ending.
He dooms her to death, and it still ends happily.
Kind of.
But that's what we want to talk about, because to me, that setup is pretty fun. Of the guy waking up 90 years ahead of schedule, gonna die, and then ends up taking the most selfish.
The movie kind of tanked, didn't it?
I didn't check.
It's old. It's an older.
We're talking about it. We're talking about it.
An
way
older,
late.
newer movie. But
I didn't watch it because I saw the preview and I was like, oh well, I don't really want to see Jennifer Lawrence in a swimsuit as the theme of the movie. Like, I don't need that to be the theme of the movie. And then turned out the movie was about more. It was about punishing a woman to death, waking her up.
By loving her.
By loving her.
Selfish love.
Yeah. And then how, of course, I think the problem is that as soon as that happens, you can see, well, there has to be some crisis which is going to kill everybody, which they have to solve together, which is the only way that we can
pull this out of the ashes.
Because otherwise it's like, yeah, you did the most selfish thing possible and doomed this girl who was about to love you to it. Let me check on.
Feels like a 2012 movie.
Yeah, 2016.
Yeah, he says 2016.
Basically 2012. The budget, 110 to 150 million. Box office, 300 million. So what? What's the
it's not a bomb.
So you double the.
But from that age, from that era
It didn't do.
of movies. It wasn't like it was way up there, but it did okay.
So it kind of
You'd cut that in half for profit, and then you have all your marketing money and yada yada.
Yeah.
And so it goes, and so it goes. I watched it with my kids on filters 2 years ago, maybe.
Yeah.
And it does need them.
Yeah. A couple scenes that I think we pillow filtered it.
Yeah.
We have it. I have ClearPlay. It was just hard to.
Brian, sigh.
I have ClearPlay. I paid
Sigh.
for
How
it.
hard do I have to sell this? I just heard you were making fun of prologues the other day.
Oh no!
Which is also
Did Heather
funny.
rat me out. Yeah. Okay.
It's like not only are you pillow filtering instead of using technology, you're also mocking prologues as self-indulgent.
Well, I mean, I think they kind of are.
Are they?
I think so. I said prologues are either self-indulgent or lazy. So I think
Why? What makes you say that?
because most of the manuscripts that I receive, and here's perhaps the key part,
This is where your inductive reasoning is going to fail.
most of the manuscripts that I see as rough drafts have a giant load of exposition at the front, known as a prologue. Where
Twas the year 1943,
Yeah.
and behind brick walls, only Sally still survived.
Exactly. Or they'd say, now in this world, these are this nationality, and these are this. It seems like fantasy prologues.
Splainy time.
Yeah. Yep. Exactly.
Yeah.
Or they're self-indulgent because it's the author so clearly having fun with no one else having fun that I called it self-indulgent. But as soon as I posted that, I was informed you, in fact, had put a prologue at the front of Outlaws.
I love a prologue.
Dang it.
And
Heather,
so does C.S. Lewis.
C.S. Lewis has one at the front of, which one is it? I can't remember. Tolkien has one. Tolkien has one. Tolkien's is really self-indulgent, though.
But let me try to pull you out of the ashes here, Brian.
This is what we're here for.
Yeah, me too. Trying to salvage you. A prologue is just the beginning. And so what you're saying is the beginning of books is self-indulgent and lazy, which is a little like it's a strong stance to take. However, if you were to say most chapter ones are either self-indulgent or lazy, it's like it's just as true as what you said about prologues. So of all the ones that had the horrible prologues, how many had just sparkling chapter ones? You know, it's
right,
like the same thing is going to continue on afterwards.
See, my advice to the manuscripts that I found was always stop doing the prologue. Please just start your book. Like, and if it's good enough to start your book, just call it chapter 1. Don't call it a
But
prologue.
if they actually had sent that in with just chapter 1 and they're not that good, you would say the same thing about chapter 1. Could we please start with chapter 2? And then it's bad also, and you'd move to chapter 3.
So why do you like prologues? I think
Because I like books, Brian.
no.
And
So
I like
books too.
I
and
like the
don't-
front. I like the front of books. And I like the back of books. And I like the middle of books when they are written by great authors and they're good.
Okay, but see, the tweet prologues need to be good. Need to be good is not as good as prologues.
Yeah, no, you're obviously clickbaiting.
Here's the thing, though. I've seen you be self-indulgent, but it's fun. So
Oh, no, I'm not denying the self-indulgent part.
you just think all writing might be self-indulgent to some extent.
I could unpack that. The prologue to Notes from the Tilt-A-Whirl was absolutely self-indulgent and fun. And I was absolutely having fun. And it closed me a 2-book deal. And I'd written 1,800 words of a prologue. And
Okay, I did say novels, to be clear. I don't mind them. I don't mind them in nonfiction.
so, sure. But the point was it was a prologue. And it, in fact, was self-indulgent, scare quotes. Depends on what you mean by that. So one of the things that you are very familiar with when I taught rhetoric and you were involved for a long time is that when you want your audience to feel something, you need to feel it first.
Yeah.
And you cannot amuse it. You cannot amuse the audience or expect them to be amused unless you are amused. And if you're writing something that amuses yourself and you are amusing, I am amusing myself, or an author is amusing oneself, then of course you are. Of course you're being self-indulgent when it's just you and your computer screen because you're having fun. Now, if you mean that in a negative way, that would be like a kind of narcissism of somebody preening in front of a mirror. So is the prologue all about you and your plumage? You know, is that what it is? Or is it a thing outside of yourself that you are really enjoying. You know, like you're taking pleasure in it, you're having fun, etc.
Yeah.
Like that question swings a lot because self-indulgent sounds like narcissistic.
Yeah.
But self-amusing or, you know, like really, that's probably the best way to think of it. Sure. Yeah, often. But it should be. Just like turns of phrase should be.
Nice.
Heather just read me a quote, made me smile, something I had written about a man with eyebrows. Like he was a man with eyebrows. Or they were eyebrows with a man. Like possession was hard to establish. Like just discussing like
awesome.
which owned the other. And like, yeah, I was laughing about it. But ultimately when I wrote that, I was amusing myself. I was having fun. And I was taking pleasure in that description and I was chasing that description. And I'm also taking myself as a weather vane and trying to amuse an audience and make an audience happy as well. And so there's a way in which, is that a self-indulgent description?
Right.
Sure.
Well, I think we've referenced before that section of Silent Bells number 4, where you have you have a truck driver section, and he's driving off into the middle of the woods, and it does feel like it goes on for a long time.
It does.
And I guess I wouldn't say, you know, at that point it's very Terry Pratchett-like. Where I think you mentioned you'd stolen that technique from Terry Pratchett of tracking a random character who brings you into a scene that you're about to tell. But I guess watching...
And that's not... it's done by a ton of people, a ton of different places, but I like Pratchett's execution of it.
Because it is a little bit silly. Like
it's not a little bit silly.
It's entirely
silly.
indulgent.
I would say that it's... the reason why I like it is because of how tunnel visioned, we can say, we'll make that a phrase up, add the ED there, how tunnel visioned readers can become and authors can become on the nature of story and tapestry and everything else. And so when you are writing a story and you have everything's tense and stressful, and then you pop out and you have this entirely different thread that encounters that. So there were and there always will be comedic beats, comedic moments, and silly moments that happen in the darkest of times, in the darkest places. And somebody's leading a little human existence, or there's a squirrel leading a squirrel existence that comes into a big momentous scene. And that squirrel has a 6,000-year genealogy that goes back to the beginning of all animal life and everything else. And God has traced an extremely silly, amusing thread that never amounted to anything for 6,000 years in order to get to this moment where there's that one chattering tree rodent in the background as this terrifying thing happens. And the fact that that's how God does it, how God tells those stories, is why I want to imitate it. I want to grab those things and pull those things in, and I want to pull them in and give the impression of, but not the reality of, that kind of thing. I can't do a 6,000 page novel about the history of a driveway rock, which is something I talk about in Tilt-A-Whirl. It's like where God is still interested in one driveway rock. And that driveway rock goes through cataclysms. That thing came out of a volcano. It hit ice cold water. It was there in Noah's flood. It's been through all these big moments, but it's also been through centuries of sitting still, thousands of years of every day, nothing happens. Just tiny, tiny shifts. And that's how God does it. So when we do it, I want to give the impression of that without having to do the full volume of that. And so bringing in external threads and kind of pushing them in from the sides is a lot of fun. And I've done it with side characters. I did it with Dixie Mist in The Drowned Vault. You hop into somebody else's narrative and you pull it in. It's not a technique that's unique to me. Right. It's something that a lot of authors use and filmmakers use and long-form storytellers use through TV shows. And it's sometimes effective and sometimes not effective. But when it's working, it gives you the sensation of a complete breadth of the world. The breadth of the world, the fact that wherever you scratch, you're going to find a full story. Wherever you go, there's going to be threads that run back, and we're just choosing to not follow them.
Okay, but what about, the beginning of, is it the beginning of The Hobbit or the beginning of The Lord of the Rings? The Concerning Hobbits section. That's the long intro explaining all the hobbitology behind, before we get into the opening of the story. I feel like we often give Tolkien an enormous pass on that, when it does feel to me sometimes like the Concerning Hobbits should go in the back with the rest of his appendices. But maybe this is poor taste.
Yeah, I don't even know. Why am I struggling to remember this? That might be edition specific. I'm wondering, I don't even know what you're talking about, Brian.
Right.
I don't know what you're talking about. I remember the Concerning Hobbits.
Right.
I don't remember the placement.
Yeah.
But at the same time, what Tolkien was writing was also a very different endeavor.
Yeah.
And so if you have the skill to give people an entirely new world and an immersive,
right.
Escape into that world, it's going to have a different pace. It's going to have a different rhythm than you would if you're doing something else. So if you're telling a Chandler novel, Chandler story, you write in a Chandler novel, you shouldn't have a big Concerning Hobbits
Sure. Okay.
section.
All right. I guess that
But
maybe
if you're
highlights
doing
the
long
point.
form, epic, immersive world, you could get away with that, especially if you're clever enough that it's hobbits and everybody wants to know more. And it's there. Some people could skip over it, but super fans are going to come back to it. I don't
Because
have
I
a
do
problem
see
with
that
at all.
mostly with fantasy. It feels like every fantasy novel has got that, I'm talking about popular on Amazon right now, has got the prologue. And it seems to me that many writers are misunderstanding what makes their work. And they put that exposition heavy prologue with, really juice the world building to start them off.
I think you're misreading all this, Brian.
This is what we're here for. As soon as this
Okay,
is what we're here for.
a good fantasy novelist
Yeah.
is going to write a good prologue.
Yep. And a bad one.
Bad fantasy is going to have bad prologues. It's possible for a decent fantasy novel to have a bad prologue. It's possible for an amazing prologue to have a bad novel behind it. But the point is that in fantasy novels, especially big fantasy novels, what I just described in terms of Tolkien is the truth. They're attempting to create big immersive worlds.
Okay.
You look at the heft of Dune in the Dune series. Like the heft of that, just the sheer volume of that, which is outrageous, right?
Phone book.
Yeah. Could it stand to be trimmed? Yes. Could it also carry the weight of a prologue? Yeah, no problem. It's this huge big thing.
Yeah.
Whereas if you're trying to do, something that moves and really clips, you don't necessarily want that. So if I'm trying to make you grab on sympathetically to a character and then just get carried away rapidly into a story, I don't necessarily need the prologue except to set some flavor.
Okay, so that's what I have the question for your Outlaws one. This is the one Heather hopefully quote tweeted to me. If you could stand still in time, you'd feel it hissing around you like wind made of sand. What were you trying to do with that prologue? I mean, I think it's thematic, clearly. And the idea of, you've got two of your key incidents there with... Do you want me to send it to you?
I'm like, okay. Let's see here. This is the danger of picking up my phone. I pick up my phone to look at that prologue, and instead I'm going to text my son back.
Let me text it to you.
Yeah, so I do remember that one. Tone, but also the nature of what you're getting into.
Yeah.
So honesty in advertising. And you're entering in, here's a taste, here's a little flavor, and here's also this assertion of what I'm doing with time, that I'm playing with time. This way, this is a time story. And that is important because I've got a bunch of people who like Ashtown and cupboards, and this is a time story.
So different.
And so it's a different thing. This is a different kind of series. And so setting the tone is setting up appetizers for a different kind of meal. So I think your objections to prologues is like objections to hors d'oeuvres.
I just hate hors d'oeuvres. They're self-indulgent.
I hate them. Them hors d'oeuvres are just the worst.
Okay, all right.
And so it's like, you know what? Plenty are.
And plenty are
sure. And usually they are precursors to self-indulgent meals. You know, it's all one piece normally.
Okay.
So if I'm serving up a bunch of pot stickers, people could have a guess as to what is coming. Like it's all one thing.
A good food metaphor to keep us on our story.
So there you go. There you go. Get off the back of prologues. You should criticize bad prologues, Brian.
Okay.
And then we'd all be in agreement.
Yeah.
And what else are we talking about today?
Well,
other than that,
yeah. We're gonna jump into.
We got off. We got off on prologues because I threw it out there. I don't remember what you were talking about.
We were discussing passengers, but there wasn't a whole lot to discuss.
Yeah.
I think the only thing that was interesting.
I got on you for not filtering it.
There we go. You were reminded of my shortcomings and managed to think of the prologue in the same breath.
Exactly.
As far as passengers, last thing though, switching the gender of the two protagonists is what to me was kind of the most interesting idea.
Yeah, I'm going sunglasses, seeing if it works.
Oh man.
Okay. Okay, let's go passengers.
So passengers, switching the gender of the two protagonists feels like it really changes that ultimate betrayal. It's much more
Why?
because him waking her up, he waking her up, feels somewhat predatory. And she feels,
He waking she.
He waking she feels predatory, but she waking he, I don't know, feels like needing help. I'm not sure. Basically, that was my only observation is that, yeah, he does something that feels so Adam-like. Then they functionally turn their spaceship into a garden without children, which, there's problems with that. But that was just my question.
They have a ton of children.
The 5,000 on the ship?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So if we look at a flip, it would have downstream consequences that would be very, very different because she's going to be angry, right? But it's more prey. But he can be preyed upon as well and would be a victim there if it flipped. And if it had in fact flipped, he would just be furious with her, right?
Yeah.
But the situation is one that would be difficult for him to need to intervene in. It would probably, honestly, it couldn't just be that he was needed to fix the engine room.
Yeah.
There was a leaky faucet.
Right.
There was a jar of pickles she needed to open. It couldn't be
right.
Just something simple like that. It'd actually have to be an alien. It would have to be some defender. Like there's the need for some level of defense.
And serpent in the garden level.
Yep. And then she would have to, be picking him out of a bunch of guys and have chosen him for a very particular reason. And I think that could be interesting. It could be an interesting story.
Yeah.
And it could still take him a long time to forgive her and so on. But
right.
I think he would, being a dude, I think just get over it faster. Okay.
Yeah.
What else are we talking about, Brian? That was Passengers. Bow tied on Passengers. An old defunct movie that Brian brought up for some reason that he hadn't filtered it and it needed the filters. Probably also had a prologue.
I don't think so. Just wakes with him awaking. All right, here's the question. We talk a lot about filters in movies.
Yeah.
What about filters in books? Do you need filters when you read?
Yeah, I just kind of hit this a lot talking about the Brontes, right?
Yeah. But I think we have a lot of questions specifically, I think more parents or YA readers talking about how do you sort through the redeeming value of a book when it feels much harder to filter on one level, and then also is it worth it? Like, is it worth filtering? Because with the movie, especially with ClearPlay, it's so quick just to filter out a couple things, watch the show, and my kids watch Jurassic Park without having to see the cusses.
Reading it is actually pretty difficult, and there's ways in which there's a distance from it, and so it's it's not as extreme, but there's also ways in which it's so involuntary and you don't have the ability to be unaffected by it in your imagination. So
right.
Until it is all pillow filtering there, then so you'd have to be really good at just like, skipping, kind of like skim.
Right.
Moving on, because you're not going to be able to control your imagination. The author is in control of your imagination, which is just the power of words.
Right. It does seem like in a movie, yeah, you're so passive, it's easy to cut it out and make the piece the same. In a book, you also have to be very active or more active, it seems like.
Yeah.
Because your mind is going to make that happen if you're reading it.
Yep.
There's almost...
And yeah, and talking to students, we, cover things like that where you can't have a room full of people where you say, don't do whatever you do, don't think of an elephant.
Right.
And they have to think of an elephant in order to veer off of the elephant. And when you're reading prose and when an author is especially good at prose, you cannot help but be there, present, feeling everything about it. And so the written word is a very, very powerful thing. And an image is it's much easier to just like close your eyes, turn your head, and it will keep moving. So the pages are turning for you.
Right.
It's like skipping in an audiobook. It's like tap, tap, tap. There's like a time stream to it. But with the pages, they're just sitting there waiting for you.
Yeah.
You avert your gaze, and yet the page is still there.
Right.
You actually have to skip yourself, kind of polka dot through, and have to have that discipline, because if somebody's going to write something truly and profoundly obscene and they're good at what they do, it's going to affect you deeply.
Yeah.
You just can't get out of it. It's like you're there.
Right. I guess that's part of the question, I guess, that we've talked about before is it worth trying to filter your way through something like Twilight or Three?
No.
And the answer is, you have to be judging things based on your own taste and your own ability.
I don't think forget filtering. I think that Twilight's just not worth it.
Yeah.
At all.
And I think a lot of parents fumble that because they'll look at Twilight and they'll be like, hey, are there inappropriate things in book one that you need to skip?
Cuss counting.
Right.
Scene counting. It's like, no, that's just not the way to do it. I think Twilight's just not worth it, period, full stop. Mm-hmm. There are other books, they're like Beautiful Ruins is an example of one where there are things in it that'd be like kind of like,
right.
Flip a page, keep going. But it's a powerful book. It's a really impressive book. A lot of the craft is pretty magnificent. And so you would kind of like skipping, at different moments, but it's actually worth it. So it's worth skipping through it in a way that filtering all the trash out of the hot dog that is Twilight is not worth it.
Right. The question of it is...
How good would a steak have to be for you to scrape some manure off the top of it?
Pretty good.
It'd have to be right? It has to be a really good steak for you to be like, you know what? I'm going to be slicing finely off the top and I'm eating the rest. Right. Because it's just that.
Or that situation. We've all been at the barbecue where you drop the burger on the ground and you're like, nah.
It looked like clean grass.
Can we dust it off?
But it's like, but how good is it? How good does it have to be?
Yeah. Well, I think a lot of people would like you to answer that question for them, Nate. That's the response.
It needs to be a 7.
Yeah. There we go.
It's a 7.
If it's a 6, stop reading the book.
Stop reading a book. 6.5, walk away.
Right.
It's got to be a net 7.
Right.
Although my kids are used to me always saying 7.5 to every single question. So we could stick with 7.5.
Okay. That's consistency.
How long will it take before 7.5?
Yeah, it's key. I think there's a sense in which I'm sure people do this with movies, but especially with books, you're by yourself, you're in the audiobook, and it's a lot easier to cut yourself a huge amount of slack than, say, watching a bad movie with your family. And I think a lot of the questions that I hear from are people saying, wow, this new series that I watch that's on the charts right now is maybe something I shouldn't be watching. Should I be watching it? Tell me about it.
I'm watching A Gentleman in Moscow.
Yeah.
And there's some tacky bits. And the kids are in bed. So,
Right.
It's much easier to do the avert your gaze like thing. It's like you and your wife are watching something and you're like, oh great, here we go. Mm-hmm. Kind of look away. It's not a big dramatic thing just to be like, yeah, whatever, skip.
Right.
Turn away. And that's a pretty natural approach. But there's by degrees, people get into this and they get more and more deeply entrenched in doing that. And then pretty soon they're not averting their gaze. And pretty soon it's just kind of like, they're looking for it. They're looking for steak with manure on it. They actually prefer it. Mm-hmm. And they might point out like, oh, yeah, that was a bad part. Or, oh, yeah, that was a bad part. But that's part of why they watched.
Yeah.
It's part of why they were attracted, part of what drew them in the first place. And so it is easy to kind of downstream get yourself into a bad place. It's also easier for people to justify, always has been easier to justify reading a bad novel than watching a bad film or bad scenes.
Is that because reading's intelligent?
Yeah. Yeah, it at least comes with some activity, some intelligence. And so you might be reading a terrible book, but people are less likely to land on you about it than if you're, doing something else. But it's also, it's one of those things where we talked about this with 10 April, talking about the arts and how grim the arts are. I've got a friend who was a showrunner on a show, and there was a big horrible scene happening, and he was not in the script, and it was like things were getting pushed, and contracts were getting flexed. And there are in the industry there are ways in which agents will sue their own clients for not doing nudity. It's like, so if they're in a position, they're in a show, and then there's no nudity in the scripts, but suddenly the scripts are modified and there's nudity clauses in the contracts, but there was nothing in the scripts. They felt safe. And so then they're like, I'm not doing this. I can't do this. It was and still is, but it was a really abusive place. And so like all the Me Too reaction is as misplaced as it's been often is justified. It came from somewhere. It came from it just misfired and didn't hit. It didn't hit all the places that it should have hit.
It didn't run back to justice, right? It
nuked a bunch of people it just nuked people, right? It was like, let's scapegoat a bunch of people with the fear of God and everybody. But everyone was complicit. Right. Very much so. But there's really awful things that go on. And this friend of mine who was a writer on a show, they pivoted, the director was pivoting. He was wanting to insert this really gnarly rape scene. And the girl's agent wasn't having her back, and it was all this big thing. And so my friend was quitting and walking off the set, and the girl was screaming at him like, don't leave. And he came back and she told him, you're going to hell for this. And he was like, this isn't me. I'm quitting. I'm throwing a fit. I'm walking out the door. But she was stuck, Now, she believed herself to be more stuck than she was. She couldn't she's that monkey in the monkey trap, right?
Right.
So you've got your hand in the jar, you're holding the nuts, and you can't get your fist back out until
So you're like, I can't quit this movie even though I don't want to do it.
Yeah, I'm feeling victimized. I'm telling this guy he's going to hell for this. I'm doing all these
Telling
other
the
things.
writer he's going to hell for writing the scene.
For having this happen in the show. And he's like, I didn't do this. I'm quitting. I'm leaving. But she's not quitting. And she's holding on to all the nuts in the monkey trap, because if she lets go,
right,
she's not just somebody's gonna make a call, her own agent's gonna drop her and sue her, she's gonna get blacklisted in the industry. It's like
she's done.
She's done. And so what she's hanging on to is fame and acting, right? She's holding on to that, and they have all the threats are happening.
Which is a pretty powerful bunch of peanuts, I think.
Yeah.
I think that's what we learned from the Me Too movement.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And so she stays. She stays, and she's going to do this scene. And she insists, like she's rebuking this guy. And she insists on him staying. And so he ends up standing just out of frame, out of camera frame, through this whole scene, through this whole awful scene, just praying audibly. Just standing there, just praying and not noticing, didn't know at the time that he was wearing a mic, and all the crew and the director and everybody were all on earpieces. So he was praying in precatory psalms that God would destroy everyone in everybody's headset.
Wow.
And it's like, it's kind of wild.
That's crazy.
but yeah, it was like a really weird thing, and it's not how I would have handled it, right?
Yeah.
But the thing is, when you're quitting, you're walking off, you're playing with your own chips, and you could be done. Like you could end up just done. And there's so much fear for the actresses that they actually have to participate, and they're not wrong. And the thing is, it's a sacrifice they're willing to make if it means a shot at fame. And so it's pretty brutal. And what ends up happening is there's a lot of bitterness about the dues that were paid. And this is where a lot of the Me Too stuff happened. There were women who were complicit, and it was voluntary. And then they want to complain after they're super famous, like after they've made it, after they paid the bill. But they knew what they were buying earlier. There's others who were just straight up, totally
victimized.
Totally innocent victims. And there's a lot of those.
Right.
Tons and tons and tons and tons. A friend of mine who listens to this podcast, so he'll know who he is, told me that he knows a number of like Disney Channel actresses, like child actresses, and every single one of them was abused. Like every one of them was abused in the studio system.
Yeah.
On their shows.
I mean,
and so it's there's tons and tons and tons and tons of it, and it's awful. It's horrific. But I throw this out there just to say, I constantly hear from Christians who think so little of a sex scene or so little of some nudity, and they don't understand the level of debasement that's happening. You know, where
the
it's
thing
like
they're watching.
in the thing that they're watching.
No,
and
that's so true. You don't think about that. You don't
and
think
so
it's a victimless piracy is not a victimless crime.
Yeah, but it's as if they walked into a room and were like, "Oh, sorry," and averted their eyes when didn't realize something was changing. They think it was some kind of accident, as opposed to it was planned, it was orchestrated. There are lighting guys and makeup people, and there's blocking, and there's multiple takes, and we're resetting, and you know, all these camera guys and sound guys and makeup people and the lighting and everything else are all here making this person do this thing. And then they're like, no, let's do it again. Do another take. But this time, you know, we're going to really push it. We're going to really traumatize you and, you know, push harder and harder and harder. It's not this little accidental, oops, look away thing. It's actually a heavily exploitive, abusive situation. Like it just is heavily exploitive and abusive. And that's not to say that those who are being exploited and abused have no culpability. Sometimes they do. Sometimes they don't. Like sometimes they're totally innocent. Right. And sometimes they have some little modicum of responsibility for having put themselves in that situation, but they're still just a victim. They're still just being victimized there. And so when these shows come and go, and you see some actress in some show and you're like, oh, I haven't seen her before. This is like her chance. And then you see them pushing her into these scenes. You know the pressure she's under. She's an actress trying to get her shot. She's trying to be taken seriously as an artist. And she's being given this opportunity. And it comes with this little carrot and stick. We can take all this away and try to end your career, or you can, you know, prostitute yourself to some extent here, and more shows, more fame,
and we'll pay you really
awards.
Well for it.
Yeah. And there's a lot of stories about that kind of thing, and it's just been in the industry from the beginning, like from the very, very.
Well, that's what I was going to ask you both for books and for movies. What maybe explain some of what's behind it. I mean, I guess obviously just pure lust and
the
power
lust of the flesh,
is what's behind it. And when you have wicked people doing the most expressive stuff they can, there's going to be a lot of wickedness.
It's going to happen.
Out.
Yeah. That's how it's going to be. But if you read East of Eden, there's grim stuff.
Yeah.
You know, it's like you're reading Steinbeck and he's amazingly talented, and it's going to stick with you for the rest of your life.
Yeah.
Like it's going to just be there.
Right.
In your head, because he's that good. And he is not being pornographic.
Right.
If you read I Am Charlotte Simmons, Wolf is trying to scar you. Like he's trying to scar you the way these girls are scarred, you know, by this, and represented by his one protagonist, but way those girls, those innocent quote unquote girls are, as they get sent into that machine.
And your rubric on that is, hey, not worth it unless you're about to send your kid to an Ivy League college.
I Am Charlotte Simmons is helpful to read for parents who are considering sending their kids off to a place like that. And it's like, but this isn't edifying for me. It's like, oh, you're right. You should avert your gaze, but send your daughter to live there. Like this is what you're sending her into. So I think that book is a replacement for Parents Weekend for most universities. It should be read by people who are actually thinking about doing shipping their kids off. And so I don't think the fact of its rawness and its roughness and its awfulness, the fact of all of that, what was the next one? Back to Blood, his Cuban Miami one.
I'm not remembering.
I think it's Back to Blood. Totally over the top, pornographic in different sections, like uselessly so. So Wolf's volume there, just like not worth it. Don't even bother. But I Am Charlotte Simmons is one where for very specific people and specific uses, I would hand that to them and say, this is required reading. Yeah. This isn't just something that's okay for you to read. You should absolutely read this before you ship your kid off. Yeah. But Steinbeck,
right?
You don't have to read that,
right? Or D.H. Lawrence being the poster child of like writing sexy but still classic literature.
Yeah, but also there's also just tons that has, I would say, glamorized the casual affairs. The flings, the affairs, all that kind of stuff. Right. It's not pornographic in itself, but it has catechized the imagination towards just this casual immorality as if it has no consequences.
Right. And did you see the birth numbers that just dropped?
Yes.
The U.S. is at
1.6. Really bad.
Childs per couple. And then I think I saw Canada's at 1.2.
Here's the thing that was wild to me. The wildest is that there were jobs added over the last 4 years. I've not looked at the data myself. This is from a friend who works at a data company. And she was telling me all about this release, the birth rates, everything else. This is her profession. She works in that stuff. Then she said that the thing that shocked her the most was the fact that of like 3-some million jobs added over the last 4 years, which is incidentally not, you think about that, 4 years of, wasn't jobs, it was workers, like into the workforce. So like 3 million new people coming into the workforce. 200,000 of them were native born. So across 4 years.
That's 50,000
50,000 a year.
In the U.S.? In
the U.S.
Oh, man, we're in big trouble.
So 1,000 per state per year? Like, what?
Yeah, how are there not more kids entering the workforce?
What? That is crazy. And I need to pop the hood on that and dive in more. But yeah, that is in fact all part of this.
Yeah.
All part of the weird catechism we have of children or slavery. We want freedom. We want freedom to kind of like pursue whatever. Yeah. But anyway, I would say books, I think we answered that a little bit. Books are...
honestly, it has to do with it is a maturity question and what you're looking for. Like, what are you trying to get out of the book?
Why are you reading this?
Yeah. Is this something you're doing research on American classics and reading Steinbeck? Or are you doing
and if
Tom
so,
Wolfe?
why?
Yeah.
And it was like, I would say if so, read Cannery Row, read some other stuff. You don't have to read East of Eden. Mm-hmm. And the thing that's funny is I know a lot of people who will be mad at me about that because it is a towering work of genius. Mm-hmm. Like East of Eden's impressive, but this one chick is a pretty bad character, badly crafted. But
are you talking about the antagonist here?
Yeah.
Okay. I only know because Christy has mentioned that character. I have
not, she's super memorable. Yeah. But there's a lot in there that has marked and scarred people in unhelpful ways, in different ways, where some of it is awakening old trauma, it's just not helpful. Like, why are you reading this? Why don't feel like you have to if it's actually going to harm you in some way.
What's going on? I think you've mentioned this before, but is there a commercial side to whether or not you have a sex scene in there or in a book too? I know editors have pushed it sometimes based on genre. Is there a commercial aspect that's driving this as well, or is it all just part of the same kind of potpourri of
you're trying to feed, you're trying to sell a meal to an audience. And if you're looking to try to draw in more people in different genres, editors could say, if we had more skin, if we had more sex, if we had more, it could bring in more readers. It could get us better reviews. Critics would flag this as like
brave.
Not just brave, but that's one thing they would do, brave for some of it, but they would flag it as
I feel like they would just
as erotic.
Yeah,
they would just just sensual and erotic, whatever, this sensual summer thriller. Like they will just tag it like that, and people are expecting some sex, and so it enables you to target a particular audience as they go after it. brave, in order to be like in the literary world and get labeled brave, you'd have to be pretty out there right now.
Yeah.
So you'd have to, and it would not sell the book more. Like it wouldn't sell to the audience more. You can still get them based on their lusts, but trying to get them based on super brave stuff, that's kind of tired.
Yeah.
It's gonna bring in some critics and some editors, but not the readers.
Gotcha. I think it is important to keep that in mind that someone made that, right? I think sometimes you isolate yourself in this little world and you're like, oh no, an author and an editor and everybody worked to put this scene in this book.
Yeah.
And so, and same thing with even more.
They planned it, they edited it. I can pressure is passing. I'm gonna bail on these.
Oh wow.
See if I can.
Must be sunny outside.
Yeah, we'll see. It's sunny inside. Yeah, think about the fact that an author sat there, imagined it, typed it up, reread it, rewrote it 3 times, sent it to an editor, got it marked up, expanded it, shrunk it, rewrote it again, schemed it, just really, really worked hard.
Kind of takes the glamour out of it.
A little bit. It's kind of like whipping through the Met and looking at the nude statuary, some of which is
Sure.
really impressive. Artistically just profoundly impressive. But one of the things it tells you is people are the worst.
Someone spent a long time.
That took a lot of time just on that backside. Just that backside was a whole lot of work. Just so
And he
much.
made it out of rocks.
so much work. It looks just like real skin. like it's funny. And then we very dismissively are just like, oh, you rube, it's art. Like it's just art.
Yeah.
It's like that was like months of that guy's life just on that backside. And it's
We made fun of that before because there was, when the Renaissance lit and the classical lit took over.
Yeah.
That was an intentional claim about the human body, and they recognized it as such. But also, there was a little bit of not so classy about it as well, on how
Quite a bit.
on all the models and how many nude paintings you were doing.
It's also funny when you go back to like Olympics and sports. We're way off track now, but it is funny to me. Is the issues of circumcision to participate in the games and like all the other stuff. All this athletic competition, there was no discussion over whether or not to be nude and compete. Like that wasn't really the hot topic. The question was, is it okay to not circumcise so that there's this athletic potential?
Yeah, crazy.
Because we're going to be competing in the nude. We know that.
Right.
Is it like, how bad is that? Anyway, that's a distraction. But it's like human beings have always gotten themselves stuck in lots of special pleading situations.
Right. Well, it's crazy to me too that the idea of, the Iliad and the Odyssey, them fighting in the nude too. It's just a different world back then.
I don't think they did.
You don't think they did?
No.
The armor? I think they just had the armor on.
No, I don't think they were fully naked.
Maybe just a loincloth plus armor.
I think it's all it's back. This is back to people.
You think people are reading backwards into?
I think people in their own hagiography.
Yeah.
Like being in the nude was this primal thing.
So Achilles had to be because he was.
Yeah, it's like
primal,
we had to get there. I think that there's I'd be willing to bet a lot of money there's a little more pragmatism. Like,
who knows what this episode is about, but I think this is worthwhile.
when the Picts in Scotland would paint themselves blue and somebody would throw himself on a spear just to incapacitate the spear so the next guy could kill the Roman soldier. Mm-hmm. I believe those people were naked because that was psycho.
Yeah.
And like they were in full on kamikaze mode, right? They were
right.
They were doing that. When you go to the Greeks and there was all this extra armor, art, etc., like all this art to it and strategy and tactics, and it was at a much higher level. I don't think they were that unpragmatic. I just don't think so. I think they have been archived as such because of all the creeps through the ages.
You're right about the creeps through the ages, though.
Anyway, I think people have been idiots for a long time.
Yeah.
And all the way back to when, somebody is putting some warriors on a pot. They've got some black vase and they're scratching it off to the red underneath. I'm like, but Mom, no, it has to be this way. It's art.
She's like, put him in his pants.
Can he have pants? No. You can't have pants on.
This is black figure pottery.
It's art. It's art. This is the art. And people have been doing that forever, and it's always been dumb. It's been dumb forever. Always. And we've done it. You can just see it on this loop through all of history. And then now we have it on Netflix streaming where somebody's like, but it's a great show. But it's very compelling. You know, the new HBO show is incredible. It's incredible, but there's bad parts. And it's like, oh, you rube, it's art. It's artistic. I think it's a very important scene.
Right.
And there are people arguing. I saw some people, I don't remember which show it was, people arguing about the nudity through some show. And they're defending some part of it. Like, well, this part actually absolutely contributed to the character. And so this was necessary to the story because there was character development while they were naked. And these other ones, they were just naked for naked's sake, and that was bad. If it had been character development, then it's fine. I've heard Christians just say it should be completely up to the actors. Like, what?
Make it completely up to the viewers.
It's like, how about just make it up to God, shall we?
Yeah.
How about we just let God decide how naked people should be in TV shows and films?
Right.
So the instant you're ready to make a case that no, this is in fact what God thinks is important.
Yeah, fine art.
And you have to have it kind of like one of those naked minor prophets who was out there like living his nudity because God told him to.
Yeah, for a long time.
Yeah,
much longer
naked
than
3 years.
Much longer than a season.
Yeah, it's like you're just going to go be in the nude, as Jeeves would say. He could say, no, God told me to do this. This is what I'm doing. Like, okay.
That's character development.
So if God tells you, then it's okay.
Well,
short of that, I'm against it.
Friends in the fine arts of art is often like, well, you have to draw naked people because you need to know how all the muscles work. And then friends who are in fine art being like, you don't have to be drawing nude models. There are easy ways around this. You have to
know how the muscles work. Yeah.
I think people do that with realism too. They're like, oh, the nudity is realistic. And
they really were naked. Like, I know they were. Those people even were more naked in front of more people with, the guy with the lights and the makeup person running in there. And yeah, no, it's ridiculous. I think one of the things that's amused me the most recently is discovering Hillsdale's their position on drawing naked people in fine art is you have to draw them naked, but they aren't naked.
Wow.
So the models aren't naked, but you draw them naked.
Interesting.
It was like,
how does that make sense? How does that make sense? It's because it looks embarrassing if you're drawing people in underwear. Or
I don't know. I've not spoken to the department heads. I don't know who the decision makers were on that particular policy, but that's a pretty funny case of special. I guess I like that it's a funny line.
The line has been drawn
of special pleading. I think there's some special pleading there. That's pretty funny.
Well,
anyways,
that was our episode today.
That was our rambling episode. We went all over the place.
It's supposed to be on book filtering, but we covered many other things as well. Prologues.
Yeah, prologues are glorious. They're the best bits. When
Send
done right.
me your best prologues.
Prologues are like the perfect crust on a meatloaf.
Wow.
Which means because meatloaf can be so very terrible.
If prologues are so good, how come I see so many bad ones? I guess that's the question. Maybe I'm reading the wrong books.
And let's ask the exact same question of books. If books are so good, how come there are so many bad ones? Yeah, because they're so good, they're worth pursuing and imitating. And that's why there's so many bad versions.
All right. I'm going to have to
We ended up talking a lot about tackiness in fiction and then nudity in art and all that kind of stuff.
And extreme victimization in Hollywood.
So. Yeah, then that's still the case, has been the case for, a century or more, and is still the case.
And it's built into the ratings, even. It feels like it very much was a top-down. This is acceptable.
Yeah, the ratings world is very funny, like the ebb and flow of ratings. And what they will rate as naughty
Right.
and what they won't
Right.
is very funny. And so there's a certain amount of nudity and F-bombs that you can get away with and be PG-13. But if you add a cigarette, it's R.
Right.
You know, it's like there's
So
little
that's where
thresholds.
you know it's on purpose. We're
It's
really
all
in trouble.
like,
It's
and it's
on
negotiated by committees, like how much nudity can actually be in something,
purpose. Down
and then
to like extreme detail.
yep, and then
man,
you
can't
have
stand that.
then you have a film that gets rated R, you know, and the studio can't have it, so they take it back to the ratings board and they negotiate and navigate, and it's all this haggling as
To get
things
it to
as things to
PG-13.
get it barely into PG-13 and then roll with it. So, huzzah!
Here we are.
3 cheers for the American West.
3 cheers for the MPAA.
Yeah, and of course they came into existence in reaction to, you know, as a corrective, as studios were just going pornographic, you know, theaters were just going, you know, fully that way, and so then this swung back in, and
They're like, let's make sure we regulate this so we make the right amount of money.
it's like unions, where you look at unions and you're like, these are trash, these are bad, but then they came into existence for a reason.
You go back to
And they
some
were
of the-
like, it's measure, countermeasure, it's action, you know, equal and opposite reaction. When, you know, when the employers are extremely exploitive, you end up with workers that unionize in order to try to resist collectively. And then they immediately start stifling their own people. And you have all the, you know, the mafia ties, et cetera, and the nature of protection money, which is ultimately kind of what the unions do in a more glorified way. But it should be a transparent way, you know, in a helpful way. Then there are times when I have, yea, verily, been grateful for the Writers Guild.
Yeah.
Where it's like, oh, wow, I'm dealing with some pretty significant exploitive studio moments, and it's nice to have a guild. But then I've also been deeply harmed by the guild multiple times. So there you go, Brian.
It's a mixed bag,
Unions.
just like prologues.
Just like prologues, there's good moments, bad moments. And you should use ClearPlay.
I do. Family movie
And
night.
love a good prologue.
I'll try.
No, that's love a good prologue.
Yeah.
That's easy.
Yes.
That's
Yes.
easy,
That's easy.
Brian.
Yeah.
That's easy.
Easy.
Enough.
Imagine the well-read man. Do you see a machine dressed in tweed, gorging on information? This book is not about becoming that kind of reader. The well-read man wakes up and consults with Moses on his way to work.
And God spake all these words, saying, I am the Lord thy God, which hath brought thee out of the land of Egypt.
He sips his coffee and ponders the wisdom of Hannibal's elephants crossing the Alps. He turns furrow-browed philosophers upside down and takes their lunch money. He changes his oil and deliberates with Peter Drucker about effective management practices. He regales his wife with the tale of Monet's water lilies in the gardens of Giverny. He sings with Sandra Boynton as his toddler's eyes grow heavy. This book is about becoming that man.
Not the hippopotamus.
Be as human as you can be. Learn how to read a book.